that we begin as minerals, vegetables, animals, etc. and on our evolutionary chain. Now the point I would like to make is everything I say on this program, it's got to come from my own experience. And my experience is limited, but I have an insight during my meditation into how consciousness unfolds, and that gives me a very good measure or knowledge base of how I see things happening. And the way I see things happening is, since I've been the whole thing started really when I first started off meditation, and the out-of-body experiences only happened as a result of my meditation. So I was never really primarily interested in out-of-body experiences and getting into the astral plane or anything like that. I didn't even know the astral plane existed. When I started out meditation, I soon became aware that there is a whole lot more to it. But it took me a few years before I had a breakthrough experience. And the breakthrough experience came after about 3 years of meditation, when I had a profound awakening experience. And just briefly, the experience resulted in the fact that I was dissociated from my body. I was having breakfast. I hadn't even meditated. It happened very spontaneously. I was having breakfast. I was eating a sandwich. In one hand, I had a very strong cup of coffee, and suddenly I could not relate to my breakfast, my hands. I couldn't figure out who these hands belonged to. And one thing led to another. I suddenly became totally dissociated from my body, and within seconds I was sort of bathed in a blinding light, and the whole room turned into an environment of absolute blinding light. The first thing I had was as if a voice said, "There you are. Where have you been?" And the first feeling I had was one of homecoming. For the first time I realized where I really belonged. And then the thing escalated in such a way that the realization of who I was became more and more apparent, who I really was, and it resulted in a state of profound ecstasy, until I reached a point where I had full awareness, full knowledge of life, of existence. And the feeling, I tried to describe it, was one of absolute clarity. There was a feeling of total clarity and a feeling of knowing, a knowingness that I was at the heart of everything that existed. Everything was a result of me, of my existence, but not me in my identity as Jurgen, but as a state of being, as a creator state. And this was, the clarity was incredibly intense, and there was nothing I could say or associate with it. It was a state of being which had no attributes. It was neither good nor bad. It was like a totally neutral being. So that now became the center point of my life. After that, my life had completely changed. Nothing was ever going to be the same. And for weeks I was walking around without any sense of my Jurgenness, my identity. I was simply everything I looked at, everything I saw, that was just of who I was. There was no sense of separation. There was a total sense of unity and a total sense of stillness and peace. So I then felt I had to get back, and fortunately, because I wouldn't have known how to carry on from that, fortunately my sense of my separated self gradually returned to me, and until I became identified again with my body, with my old sense of self. Now this original experience, which happened about 50 years ago, was very, very profound, and it was the guidepost of my future existence. So from then on, my attention, my focus was totally devoted to finding my way back home. That is how I experienced it, that I had to find my way back home because there was no other way I could exist. Now, this sort of explains a bit how then my career unfolded, my inner path unfolded. There's another thing that has taken place since then, and we're talking about sort of 50 years ago, nearly, when this first happened. Another thing that started taking place in my life was I became aware of a presence around me, an awareness which I began to refer to as my silent companion. It felt as if somebody was walking along beside me, but I couldn't identify it as a person. I saw it as an aspect of a higher awareness, as my higher self, if you like. So, but in the meantime, I also, with the aid of my silent companion, I was able to dig deeper into the mystery. Now, my silent companion was a bit like an awareness, a stillness, a kind of mental or spiritual space. And the moment I had a question, I posed the question and put it into this spiritual space, and I discovered I could find the answers out of this silence, out of this spiritual space. Now, in the meantime, during my out-of-body experiences, I also met a guide. And the guide came about because I became frustrated, because all my out-of-body experiences appeared to be happening on a very Earth-like level. And I knew there was a lot more to it, because occasionally I had a glimpse into much brighter, more beautiful places. So that's why I put the picture up, to give you an indication, because I'm also an artist and illustrator. And the worlds I came to visit, I was very keen to actually draw them, and document them in my work. So then I met a guide. He was a Chinese master. He came to me during an out-of-body experience, and he started teaching me. He started taking me on as a pupil, if you like, and he introduced me to different states of consciousness. The first way he started going about it was by giving me riddles to solve, or putting me in situations where I had to overcome my fear of death. And I documented some of these experiences in my first book, Multidimensional Man. He introduced me into higher states of consciousness, and the way he did that, he adopted a language which was non-verbal. Everything happened on a telepathic way of communication, but even that wasn't sufficient to get me into these higher states. So he communicated with me via using symbols, and the symbols, I had to unravel the symbols, and I found by understanding the symbols I got a glimpse of another state of consciousness which was totally opaque to me before, and so I gradually got an insight. I got the first inkling, the first breakthrough of a higher state of consciousness for which we just simply don't have any language. So what happened then, about in 2000, in 1980, I got up very early in the morning. I was meditating. Until then, I've been painting, working as a painter. I was an abstract painter while I was pursuing a career as a graphic designer. But I produced an abstract painting, and I suddenly, as I looked at the painting, I thought, oh, that looks a bit like a landscape. And on this note, I closed my eyes and I went into a deep meditation. And then something extraordinary happened. I went through different levels of reality, different levels of consciousness, until I broke into a completely different state of consciousness, which was, it was, the way I described it was as if I was coming home out of the cold into a warm room, which was lit up by a beautiful fire, and I felt I was coming home out of the depths of winter, and I was still wearing a heavy coat, and I had to strip off the coat in order to be comfortable. And the coat was my astral body. I had already left my physical body because I was on the astral level. But as I entered this new state of consciousness, my astral body became like a lumbering impediment to my well-being. So I had to discard this astral body in order to enter this higher state of consciousness. And then the journey began, where I went through these different states of consciousness, and I described it in my book, Multidimensional Man, if you want to know more about it, without going into too much detail. And then again, I finally entered the state again of absolute clarity consciousness. Now, from then on, of course, my experiences took another turn, and of course, I also started a career as an artist. I had a family, I had children, so my out-of-body experiences and my spiritual development took a back seat, although I still meditated every day for 1 or 2 hours. And so my journey continued. My silent companion, it was still there. I still had this internal dialogue. And so I was guided along the way, not just internally, but also externally via the things that happened in my life. And so this gradually I became, this whole experience became a little bit like my home turf, if you like. I became much more at home, and it is the feeling of being at home was very profound. The other thing which is very important, and I was continuously reminded of it, was that in order to progress in this world, in these levels, you have to totally abolish fear. If there's the slightest fear, it will hold you back. Fear is a very negative aspect. It's an impediment on your spiritual development. That's one of the first things that has to go. So what happened is I was very often confronted with scary aspects, and I had to overcome fear. I was confronted with death and all sorts of things. And in 2011, I was diagnosed with cancer, and that to me was a very, very great breakthrough experience, because I discovered that I didn't have any fear, that I wasn't afraid of death, especially because I knew there was no such thing, but also fear had totally disappeared from my life. So what I did, I thought, okay, I was a bit shocked because I didn't expect that, but I thought, oh, that's a great opportunity to focus on the present moment, to focus on life, how it actually unfolds, And I thought, if anything to do with my illness, I just leave it to the doctors, because they know what to do. So I don't even have to worry about that, because I know nothing about it. So the thing was, of course, I had these. I went through these sort of sickness experience. I had the operation. The operation went terribly wrong. I nearly died twice. But the thing was, I had some really incredibly beautiful experiences as a result of it. I could write a whole book about the 10 days I spent in hospital, because that was a breakthrough experience. Soon when I came out, I had adjusted to a state of living totally in the here and now, in the present moment, and I was at home. Whether I was in another country, I always had the feeling of home. And that was emphasized 1 year, 2 years after my illness, when I went on a retreat in Scotland. And that is for 1 week. That is where I had the third breakthrough experience, a third experience of absolute clarity. And that was really important. I documented every day I was there, and I wrote a book about it, which is called The 10-Minute Moment, because the experience of this state of consciousness only lasted 10 minutes. But it was so overpowering and so overwhelming that I refused to actually describe the experience before, because I felt there was no way I could describe it. Then 2 years later, I wrote my third book, which was Vistas of Infinity. Vistas of Infinity dealt with much more in-depth research of the afterlife states. Okay, and there I was now totally handing the guidance of my experiences over to my silent companion, or over to my higher self. So I never looked for an out-of-body experience, but when I had one, it was always something I was there to learn, some lesson about life. But this is a long introduction to the first question, which was, is it true that we begin as mineral, vegetable and animal? Because now what is happening, the space of my identity is located in a state what I describe as knowingness. So what I described earlier, a state of a space, an inner space of silence. You can actually gain all the information you want by addressing this space of inner silence. And if your mind is still, and that's why I think meditation is such a powerful tool, and everybody should take it up. Once we put the mind to rest, and the internal dialogue, the internal monologue, once we are able to put it aside, then we open ourselves up to the inner knower, which is a state of consciousness where we have access to the knowing field. And it is out of this knowing field that we can investigate certain questions, can gain certain answers of things, how they work. So when I was looking at the first question, I thought, yes, the way consciousness works, the way I experience it, is everything is consciousness. There's nothing in our existence, nothing in the world, nothing outside us that is not consciousness. We pick up a pencil, a flower, anything. Everything is made out of atoms, which in the essence are intelligence. And there's no getting away from it. Now, when you look at the literature, there has been a lot written about it. And the way it has been written about it is that everything is consciousness, every flower is conscious, and what people associate with it are like the nature spirits. associated to everything, and another consciousness. But to me, not being influenced by the mythology or existing knowledge, let's say, that is propagated, the way I see it, everything is intelligence, and this intelligence organizes itself around certain systems in nature. You know, for example, there's a system like the weather system. There's a system around nature, around flowers or trees or a forest. There are systems of energy which are coming together and working and cooperating with each other. Let's say there's a mountain. The mountain has got a system of energy which is surrounding itself, and it is an intelligence which is inside and makes everything work and makes everything work in harmony with all the surrounding aspects. And there's even a consciousness which is organized around our internal organs or our cells. Every cell in our body is consciousness, is intelligence. And this intelligence is the primary force of everything that exists. And so when we talk about did we begin as minerals? Yes, everybody who is living here, in the intelligence, the consciousness is in minerals, and it is in vegetable, in animals, in insects, is everywhere. And our evolution as a greater consciousness goes through all these life forms, all these organizations, and until it particularizes, until it individualizes as an organism which has a self-identity, and it becomes conscious. And that is what we are. We are the culmination point of the intelligence which is everywhere, which is specialized and individualized as a human being. Now the thing is, we carry all the information of our history of being a mineral, being a plant, being an animal, being an insect. We carry all the information within ourselves. So at any one time, we can relate back to this sort of field of consciousness and become an awareness of it. And not only that, but we will also discover, as I described in my book, Vistas of Infinity, that we have had many, many experiences as individuals, as human beings, in different forms, in different states. And we can also remember and recall then our experience as a fox or as a bird. So once we get the full access to our primal experience, we can easily relate to everything that exists in our world and connect to it again. Because once we go back to our source consciousness, we begin to realize our true nature. And our true nature is not our appearance. Our true nature is unity consciousness. So now, I'm not just saying this because I thought about it a lot, but I have actually experienced it. I've experienced it so many times, and I wrote a chapter in my book, Vistas of Infinity, to explain it a little better on the basis of one experience where I described life as a tapestry. And the way I described it, the wholeness of me and every one of us, is we are a conglomeration of energy centers, and each energy center is an experience, and the experience can be anything. And when we reach a higher unity state of consciousness, we can trace our identity back to anything we animated in the past, whether it's a mountain, whether it's an insect, or whether it's another human being. We've forgotten all about it. Now, recently, I had this experience of, and it was actually quite when I got back to my body, it was in some sense it was actually quite scary, because I was a glacier, and the way I experienced it, I saw myself as two massive ice walls, and in the middle there was water, and nothing happened. Nothing happened for thousands and thousands of years, and I was just an iceberg, an ice mountain, and there was water, there was a stillness, there was this feeling of total isolation, and it went on for thousands and thousands and thousands of years, and that was my experience. And I knew I had this experience because I was conscious as an iceberg. I had the intelligence of this iceberg, and I was experiencing it. Now in 2013, when I had my second clarity experience, I also experienced the suffering of every living creature, every human being, and it was so immense and so powerful that I was only saved by experiencing the absolute opposite, the joy of every living thing. And that can only be experienced, that cannot be experienced in a physical body, because the experience is too enormous, you know. So the experience was happening in a state of unity. And that's where I became one with everything. So that is a basis on which I sort of base my experience. Everything I talk about is coming from this space of inner experience.